Hey guys, welcome back to the video series where we're developing the New City Eastlake website in Webflow. In the last video, we looked at the design rationale for the hero, and then we developed it, and now we're going to be looking at the next section. So let's jump into InVision Studio first and talk about some of the design decisions around the next section. The section that we'll be working on today is the Get to Know Who We Are section. Above us is the hero that we worked on last time, and this is going to be an interesting section to discuss because it's mostly text. Usually I don't like to do that. I like to pair text with an image or maybe some iconography or illustration just to kind of liven it up. But I purposely wanted it to be really simple. The reason is when I was doing the user journeys with the executive director, one thing that came up was that particularly for one of our profiles, the member or the regular attender, there's probably a large portion of people who don't even know that we have cross-cultural values, and probably a small group of people who could be able to recall our mission statement from memory. Actually, I'm one of those. I wouldn't be able to recall it from memory if I was asked. And so it was kind of important to have our mission statement and cross-cultural values up front right away. If you've ever kind of watched somebody going through a website or used like a UX tool like Full Story to see a recording of somebody going through a website, you'll notice that very few people stop to really read carefully through text. So it's true that maybe a lot of people will just kind of skip past this section. But honestly, I think that would be okay because kind of the goal of this section is just to remind people that, hey, we have a mission and we have these values, and we just kind of want to have that before you regularly so that you're reminded of those things. And hopefully they'll also take some time every now and again to read through these, and kind of through the life of the church, we'll kind of recall the congregation's attention back to this. But it's kind of unusual to do this, and partly it's because, it's a church and it's very mission driven. So that's why we kind of have this section. One word about long form text. If I scroll down, these two paragraphs right here are a pretty good example of what the body copy for the website will look like. If I click down into the paragraph, you'll see that it's over here in the typography section. It's Source Sans Pro, about 16-point text, and it's actually the opacity scaled down a little bit just to give the headline tags and the titles a little bit more primacy. And if I scroll back up, you'll notice that the body copy for the mission and cross-cultural value statements, it's quite a bit larger. I think it's 18-point text, and it's also in Poppins, not Source Sans Pro. And that was a deliberate design decision because I'm wanting to establish a little bit of typographic hierarchy. And I kind of want to communicate that these statements are really important, they deserve your attention, and I also want to make them eminently readable so that it doesn't feel like it's small, kind of like cluttered text that you can easily skip by, but it's open, inviting, breathable text that would be a delight to read. So that's the design rationale behind this section. Let's now jump into Webflow and start developing it. We're back in Webflow, and before we move on to creating our Get to Know Us section, I made a mistake in the last video, and I make this mistake almost every single time I work in Webflow. It's just kind of like something unique to me, I guess. But anyways, the mistake I made was I failed to make these a link block. They're just regular divs. And the reason that it's important is because right now if a user clicked on these, even though it has the appearance of a button, or it's styled to kind of like react and let you know it's clickable, it actually doesn't have any clicking functionality. It has to be a link block in order to do that. And so I'm going to address that really quickly. I'm going to move a link block into my hero card container. And the wonderful thing about CSS, cascading style sheets, is that if I simply just add the hero card class to this link block, it's going to take on all of the attributes that I assigned to these cards. So even the hover state is retained. And so I'm just going to move over these pieces of text and delete the old card. And you'll see right away that this underline kind of got assigned to the text. And that's because it's not just Webflow. It's anytime on the web, when you introduce a link, browsers just kind of automatically assign an underline to it. But there's plenty of indication that this is a clickable element, and I don't really like how the underline looks, and so we're going to get rid of it. Simply in the typography section, we're going to select no underline. All right, I'm going to copy my card, delete the text, and move over this. All right, awesome. Problem fixed. Now, when I finish kind of creating the page, if I'm have the hero card selected and I go to the settings, I can select link to a section of the page, and the section will show up right here. All right, let's move on to the Get to Know Us section. I'm going to add a new section. I'm going to make sure that my body is selected. And just a word about sections. We spoke last video about organizing your website so that it's easy for search engines to crawl your site and kind of assign some value to the content. And so dividing your website into sections is a super helpful way to accomplish that. The other thing is, as we create this section, we want to kind of keep future sections in mind so that we're keeping our the way we style the website just really clean and simple and minimal. What I mean is that I'm going to create a section class. And let me go over to InVision Studio. I know that I plan for there to be 120 pixels of white space above and below every section. So the way to accomplish that is I'm going to give 60 pixels of padding to each section. The reason I'm not giving 120 pixels of padding is because if I duplicate this section, you'll see that now there's 60 pixels of padding in the bottom and 60 pixels of padding at the top. And essentially it's giving me the 120 pixels that I need. The kind of exception to that is this top section here. There's only 60 pixels of padding at the top. And so I'm going to add a combo class and name this section add margin top. And go ahead and create 120 of pixels of padding at the top. All right, so now all of my sections should have the appropriate padding. Next, let's go over to InVision Studio, and basically to create these two columns, we're going to be using Flexbox and then styling our paragraphs in there. So in the section, I'm going to add a div block. And normally I would add a container and then add all of my content within the container, but we're going to constrain the widths of our columns, so I think we can avoid that for now. All right, we're going to name this Flexbox 2 columns. Go ahead and set the display setting to Flexbox. We want it to be horizontal, but we want the columns to be aligned to the center of the page and to the top. Next, I'll add a fresh div block, and this one I'll call flex 2 column child, and duplicate that within the flex box. And so those are our 2 columns. Now we can begin adding content to these and go from there. The wonderful thing about Flexbox is when we start making the site mobile responsive, we can change the setting from horizontal to vertical, and that means that our columns, instead of being side by side, are going to be stacked one on top of the other. So it's going to make it really easy for somebody scrolling to see the content. All right, so next we're going to add a simple piece of text, and we're going to apply our eyebrow CSS class there. I think it said get to know who we are. Okay. this is get to know. Perfect. And then inside of the child, I'm going to add a heading tag. And remember that headings are kind of like the chapters, or kind of like a bullet point kind of summary of your website. And so the H1 tag is kind of like the title of my page. And so this really needs to be an H2 tag. All right, get to know who we are. All right, then I'm going to add an H2 CSS class, and Webflow automatically assigns some padding to the top and the bottom. We're just going to get rid of that. We may add some back in later, but we want to be able to customize that to our design. Next, the design calls for this being in Rockwell, so we're going to change that to our Rockwell Google Fonts alternate, which is Zilla Slab. And bold, again, is a little bit too bold. And normal, it doesn't create enough contrast between the eyebrow above it, so we're going to make it medium. And let's double check our font size. It's 36. All right, and again, I don't like using, since this H2 tag will be used elsewhere on the page, even though there's no like multiple lines, just in case we run into a situation where there's 2 lines of the H2 class, I want to set this to 1.5 ems. All right, get to know who we are. Next, we'll add that little kind of like purple highlight bar goes left of the H2 tag. Div block. And just to get it exact, I believe I set this to 80 pixels wide and 3 pixels tall. All right, so we'll call this highlight bar. Not sure what else to call it. I think I've got my purple color already in here. And we're going to set the width and the height. Width is 80 pixels, height is 3. All right, and to achieve kind of like the side-by-side display, we're going to wrap these elements in their own div block. All right, I didn't think I was going to be able to grab that little bar. All right, yeah. And we'll call this class headline wrapper. All right, we'll make it flexbox. Definitely needs to be horizontal, left aligned, and vertically center aligned. Great. Next, we'll add a little bit of margin, I should say, to the right of the highlight bar, because I want to push it away from the who we are. And let's double check. InVision Studio says that's 20 pixels. We've been using 18 and 24 as kind of like our spacing system. So I'm just going to make this 18 instead of 20. And then last, for this little section here, I want the left side of the W to match the left side of the G in get to know. So we can use a negative margin to do that. I kind of like don't like to use negative margin because it feels like cheating somehow, but we know that this bar is 80 pixels wide and this spacing is 18. So if we just do negative 98 pixels of margin, that should perfectly align the W and the G. Perfect. All right, next up is an H3 tag. So kind of like I said, your headline tags are kind of like a bullet point system. Our mission and our cross-cultural values are really like subsections of who we are. So in H3 following an H2, the search engine is kind of saying, oh, okay, this content is part of this whole. All right, so inside of the child, I'll add a new headline and make sure it's an H3. I'm going to add an H3 CSS class. And I believe this said our mission. All right. And let me double check the typography in InVision Studio. Poppins medium, font size of 24. All right, it's actually at 24 already. It's just that the font was a little too bold. So we'll change that to medium. And again, it's automatically applying the 20 and the 10 in terms of padding, margin. So let's go ahead and figure out what we actually designed. So we gave our mission 24 pixels of margin to the bottom and 46, that should probably be 48 pixels of margin to the top. All right, so this should be 48 and 24. I want to mention why I did 48 and 24 in a second here, but let me add my paragraph first. So going back to the column child, I'll add a paragraph. And let me go get my text and add it here. All right, and I'm going to name this later on when we get to actually using the normal body copy, I'll select the all paragraphs tag to add our typography stylings. But since this is the only time that we're going to be using pop-ins for body text, I'm going to create a special class called statements paragraph. It's already pop-ins, and it's going to be 18 pixels font size, regular, and line height of 30. We'll use M's for that. And so this should be 18. Just looking at the line height, it looks a little too kind of close to each other right now, not quite as readable. So let me make this 2 M's and see how that looks. It looks like it might be a little too much, so let's try 1.5 M's. All right, I think that looks better. Let's take a fresh look once we style the width. So right now it's kind of spanning the entire width of the page, and I want to give the columns a fixed width. So they kind of like the same concept of these buttons. I want them to appear to have like the same visual weight. So I know these are 372 pixels wide. All right, so it's looking more like a column. And then this mission statement is a little interesting because we specifically added some line breaks in there. So I'm going to add those back in. All right, there we go. Let's come back to why we added different types of margins to these H3 tag. So just visually, the way that our brain works is any content that's grouped together, we just assume that that content is related in some way. So I wanted to distance our mission farther from the headline of the section than it is from the paragraph, because what the brain will assume is that these two pieces of content grouped together are related in some way. And they would be right. Our mission is the title of what this paragraph is. All right, let's make sure we're going to add anything else. And it looks like we're missing our button, Meet Our Leadership. All right, so inside of the column, I'll add a fresh button, and we'll go ahead and call it button. All right, so it's pulling in the styling from the blue button that we added in the hero. And I want the focus to be on the text and not necessarily on this call to action, which is Meet Our Leadership. So the way that I can do that is by making this button a little bit kind of less pronounced. So I'm going to add a combo class and call it a secondary button. I'm going to get rid of the drop shadow. I'm going to add a border of 2 pixels around the button. Oh, I just saw that The reason it jumped down to 2 lines is because this button actually has a fixed width. So we want to get rid of that. And just put auto in the width. And second, we'll get rid of the background and make it just transparent. And last, we'll make our typography black. I didn't use blue here because even though you see the blue nicely here in the border, I felt like blue text on white wouldn't be quite readable enough. All right, so there is our first column. Maybe the last thing I'll do is another way to establish typographic hierarchy is through contrast and color. And so right now, even though this is grouped by itself and this is the largest pieces of text and the boldest, I want to add a little bit more contrast so that that's the kind of the first thing that your mind looks at. So I'll do that with color. And instead of using the full black, I'm going to use this gray that is essentially an 80% tint of our black. All right. So now it looks even more like these two pieces of type are connected and that they're kind of like subservient to this title. All right, so now we've got to do our next column. I'm going to copy and paste the H3 and the same thing with the paragraph. I'm going to copy over the paragraph from here. And add in the spaces that kind of got deleted. There should be 4. Okay, perfect. And then this is our cross-cultural values. There's something about the way that this hyphen interacts with the S I don't quite like, so I'm just going to add 2 quick spaces there. And it's a little too much space, but I like it better than, well, I don't know. I'll just get rid of it. And okay, that looks fine. All right, and then the last thing is I wanted the top of our cross-cultural values to be at the same height as our mission. So I'm going to do that by adding a combo class to the rightmost child, and I'll call it a second column child right. And I'm going to have to eyeball this a little bit and just kind of figure out what looks pretty close. All right. Another thing I can do is Webflow currently doesn't support any kind of like guides that you can bring in. But if I make the section relative and then I add a fresh div block, I'll just call this guide. We'll make it 100% width, 3 pixels tall. We'll just give it like a nice purple background so that we can see it. And I will absolutely position it to the top. And then I'll just start like bringing it down. There it is. For some reason I can't see it. Guide. Oh, it's because I gave the color to the text. I want to give it to the background. There we go. All right, and so I'm just bringing it down so that I can make sure that, there we go. So it looks like we got this almost exactly correct. Maybe just a couple more pixels. One last one. Perfect. All right, and now we can get rid of our guide, and those are perfectly aligned. The last thing is I want there to be some space between the 2 columns, and since we already have a combo class attached to this right column, I'm just going to add some margin here, and that way it won't add it to both columns because that would artificially push the entire section to the right. It's only going to add it to this one here in the middle. And let's see if I can figure out the spacing. 46, which should really be 48. And there we go. Still looks just a tad close to me, so I may just go ahead and make this 60. All right, perfect. All right, let's take a look at this in preview mode, and it's looking great. Maybe the one thing I'll change is I think the line height is maybe still just a tad close. I had it at 1.5, so maybe I'll make this 1.75. All right, yeah, much better. All right, so if you start down here, scroll, and you have this nice piece of inviting text to read. Oh, I just realized the one thing I forgot was to add a hover state to the button. So let's do that really quick, and then we'll call this section done. Essentially what I'll do on hover is add back in our background, the blue, and our box shadow. All right, so let's go back to the none state, and we'll just make sure that we have some transitions. So background color is already set. I'm not sure if there's, oh, there it is, box shadow. And see. I'm actually not liking the box shadow because it's a strong shadow since it was on the hero. So I may just go ahead and take that off. Take off the box shadow, hover, just leave it off. I'm just actually going to delete it. And same for none. Okay. Perfect. All right, and we are now done. I'm going to go ahead and publish this so you guys can see it if you go to the Webflow subdomain. And next up, we're going to be tackling this Visit Us section that has just kind of like a graphical map of the church's location. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and that way when I upload the video about the Visit Us section, I also have a video planned on some branding that I did recently for a local startup. You'll get notified about those videos and be able to watch them. Thank you so much, guys, and talk to you soon.